This is Human Coined, a series that unpacks the mechanics of public finance, the complexities of democracy, and the societies they ultimately shape. I'm your host, Geoff Dubrow. Join me in a social dialogue that cracks open important issues that are too often ignored here at home and around the world. So Olusegun Elemo, Executive Director of the Paradigm Leadership Support Initiative in Nigeria. Welcome to Human Coined.
Yeah, thank you, Geoff, for having me. Happy to be here on the podcast. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll have to stick with this until we find a chance to finally meet in person, which I know we're working on.
I certainly look forward to that. Certainly.
You're doing some very unique work in your organization with Supreme Audit Institutions. Can you tell me a bit about your organizational mandate and how your organization came about?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. It was in 2016, we were looking at the fiscal governance landscape in Nigeria, the accountability ecosystem, and trying to find what's missing, what's currently not being done in the ecosystem, in trying to solve the service delivery gaps in the country. And then having scoped the landscape, we narrowed down to public auditing. And then in 2016, September 1 precisely, we got incorporated, but we started operation on 1st of October 2016. Our work at the time was focused primarily in the public finance ecosystem in Nigeria, working closely with the Supreme Audit Institution at the central government. And then we started this collaboration, and then we started to enable the use of audit data for anti-corruption work, and also catalyzing, legislative activities around, public audit process in Nigeria. But our work has evolved from where we started in 2016. We've moved to subnational, where we are now engaging with other 36 Auditors General and also 36 Auditors General for local governments. Altogether, we're interacting with about 73 Auditors General in Nigeria. It's a big work. With that work now, we've also evolved, and in 2023, we updated our strategy to then now begin to look at two-pronged approaches to our work. One, public finance, and the other, public policy. And we are now connecting public policy to public finance. And our methodology is simple. Look at policy objectives, what policymakers want to achieve, how are they making fiscal plans for these policy objectives, how are they implementing the fiscal plans, and then we are also integrating social and statutory audit mix into that. So we have this technology platform now, policytracker.ng, and with that, we are now looking at different sectors of the economy, looking at the public finance aspect of it and looking at the public policy aspect of it. So that's what we updated our work to reflect in 2023. But primarily, the work sits around what Supreme Audit Institution does, how Auditors General engages with relevant agencies of government, evaluates and oversight use of public money, and ultimately deliver value to the people. That's the end goal for us.
Sounds like you're doing amazing work. And I wanted to narrow down our discussion a little bit and talk about this recent report that you did on value for public debt in Nigeria, examining the roles of SAIs and oversight actors. As you know, a lot of the work that I do as a practitioner is related to public debt management and oversight of public debt management. And I'm always very interested in any horizontal initiative, because I believe in the horizontal approach to public debt management. That is, no one actor, especially not the Ministry of Finance, can deal with public debt alone. So the role of SAIs in public debt is something I think that's a fairly untapped area. If you look at sort of global expertise, there's not a lot of material on that issue. Yeah. So I wanted to start with a really interesting excerpt from your report, where you say that despite constitutional provisions and fiscal regulations intended to guide responsible borrowing, weak oversight, limited public scrutiny, and poor implementation of audit recommendations have allowed debt accumulation to occur with little accountability. This is our starting point. So can you elaborate a little bit on what those gaps are and how they affect public debt management overall?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Geoff, again. So in terms of, the issue around weak oversight, insignificant public scrutiny around public debt, say that, for instance, the transparency around public debt management in Nigeria is very, very poor. I mean, the process by which public debts are negotiated, public debts are acquired and utilized, there is little to no involvement of civic actors in that ecosystem. Yes, a few of us, a few of our colleagues, do some work on fiscal transparency, but that much work is largely around the organic budgets that is passed year in, year out. But when it comes to how funding flows into the budget, which of course also has to do with how public debts are acquired, you don't see much of civic engagement in that. In fact, you don't see much of oversight involvement in that. And what I mean by oversight involvement, so we just break it down to our audience, is that how much role do the legislature play in negotiating public debts, in acquiring public debts, and in utilizing public debts? I'll give you an instance. So, for instance, the supervisory board for the debt management office, you have everybody except legislative representation and representation from Supreme Audit Institution. In fact, the chairman of that supervisory board is the vice president, who is from the executive. The deputy chairman is the minister of finance. And then you have other members, including the governor of the central bank. You have the Director-General of the DMO as the secretary. You have largely people from the executive managing the supervisory board. So where then is the role of legislature? From our understanding, we believe that supervisory board, which is the governance going on for debt management in Nigeria, should involve and include representation from Parliament and representation from Supreme Audit Institution. So not having that is a huge accountability gap on its own. Then there's nothing that says that you can't even have civil society representation on that board. I mean, you have very knowledgeable expertise from the civil society. So if you then have a civil society representation on that board, it gives the civil society community the view that yes, you have non-state actors who are also looking into how debts are negotiated, acquired, and utilized ultimately. So that's what we mean by weak oversight and inadequate public scrutiny, and then even post negotiation, and when you come to actual utilization of public debt, the transparency in that space is very limited. For instance, who is the country borrowing from? What are the terms of the engagement, the borrowing? What are the risks involved in this borrowing plan? What is the maturity date for this borrowing? What are the interests payable on these loans and things like that? And you know that there are different loan providers, debt providers. So we want to see a situation where there is increased transparency. Let's put all the information out there. Maybe at the governance level, you have some limited involvement, participation of key stakeholders. But like I have said, Those stakeholders must include legislative representation, representation from supreme audit institutions, and civil society, which currently is not the case. We want to see something that moves towards that, so that we can open up the space for more engagement. And then when it comes to actual utilization of the debt, after the negotiation has been concluded, we want to see those debt documents published for public access, so that citizens can then ask questions where those questions require to be asked.
And what are you seeing in terms of the capacity of the Auditor-General to review the public, for example, the financial statements, the annual report of the Auditor-General? Does that report include public debt figures? Do they have the capacity to analyze the debt figures and comment on the accuracy of the information provided by the executive branch? What are you seeing in terms of the capacity of the executive branch of the Supreme Audit Institution in that regard?
Well, I think currently the kind of insights we've drawn from reports of the Auditor-General that we've reviewed, and we've reviewed several reports of the Auditor-General, not precisely now for the federal government. You don't have disaggregated data that links to public debt acquisition and utilization. And we feel that there's a huge gap there. In fact, the kind of capacity that is displayed when you look at the report of the Auditor-General is very, very limited capacity displayed. And I'll give you an example. So in Nigeria, for instance, you have approximately about 1,000 ministries, departments, and agencies of government. Number one is that the Auditor-General is not empowered by the Constitution to audit statutory bodies, SOEs, as you may call it. What the Constitution allows the Auditor-General to do is to conduct periodic checks. And we haven't had much periodic checks reports. I mean, maybe if we have any at all, maybe we'll have 2 periodic checks in the last 2 decades. That tells you how the SOEs, go under the radar in terms of, oversight of a Supreme Audit Institution. But let's even narrow down on the core agencies of government that the audit institutions play oversight on. So we conducted a research in 2021 thereabout to look at the number of agencies covered in the report of the Auditor-General annually. And it will interest you, we looked at a 5-year trend between 2017 to 2020 thereabout, and 2021, I think. And what we saw was that the Auditor-General did not audit more than 25% of agencies of government in a year. What that tells you is that 75% of agencies of government go under the radar every year without audit. The methodology for selecting those agencies that will be audited, I don't know, because we'll have to defer to the Auditor-General on that kind of information. But what we see is that there's a huge gap there, in that many agencies just operate annually and move on to the next year, receive their budgetary allocations, and they can go on for 4, 5 years, 10 years sometimes without having been audited at all. That's a very huge problem there. Now, that's a technical gap. Now, when you look at even post-audit activities, the timeline for releasing reports of the Auditor-General is also a very big issue. The 2020 and 2019 report of the Auditor-General, for instance, in Nigeria, took more than 30 months after the end of the financial year for work to be concluded on it and to be released, to be submitted to Parliament and to be released to the public. That's also a very huge problem there. And Parliament has also come to complain that how do you expect us to hold people accountable when they've had more than 30 months to to jog around with public money. So those are real issues. So in terms of the comprehensiveness of audit reports and audit activities, and then the timeliness of audits report itself, we think that there is, a huge work that needs to be done. Likely some, due to capacity, some due to funding challenges, some due to gaps in the legal framework. In fact, majority due to gaps in the legal framework. But I think that if all the stakeholders come together and agree that we need to solve this puzzle, I think we can move the needle a little bit.
And one of the things I like to say is, no country in the world has strong debt oversight unless they have strong budgetary oversight to begin with, because debt oversight is a subset of the larger budgetary oversight process. So it does concern me when I hear you say that it took 30 months, because I think the systems are all geared in SAIs in Africa. They're all geared towards ensuring statutory compliance or compliance with the statutory requirement of submitting that annual report. And a lot of the other types of audit, including performance audit, will often suffer because it will be an all hands on deck situation to get that annual report out.
Yeah.
What you're saying is that, unfortunately, in that case of Nigeria at the federal level, that's not happening. Even if it's all hands on deck, the delay of is not meeting the statutory requirements of submitting that annual report. That's correct?
Absolutely. Currently, as we speak now, we're in 2025, and this is August 2025. We don't have the report of the Auditor-General, not even the statutory report that you referred to. We're not talking about specialized report now. We're talking about the statutory report that the Constitution requires that the Auditor-General submits to Parliament annually. We don't have that of 2021. That of 2022 currently. We don't have it. So you have the 2022, the 2023, and 2024 currently outstanding, and it's a big problem in that regard. If you're struggling to produce those constitutional required documents, then
that's right.
How much time do you then have to produce specialized reports? Performance audit reports, and I've also interacted with other supreme audit institutions in Africa and even across the Atlantic. And for instance, I know the NAO produces, the UK NAO produces more than 80 performance audit reports annually. So in that case, we're not talking about financial and compliance audit report. We're talking about performance audit report that addresses service delivery gaps to the people and ensures that services are delivered optimally to the people. So that's the kind of thing you want a supreme audit institution to also focus on, but where you're struggling to even deliver on constitutionally required obligations, then that's a big problem.
Yeah, it's a big problem indeed. Sometimes the challenge for the SAI lies in getting that information from the entities, right? Like the entities are not preparing their own financial statements, for example. So do we blame the SAI entirely, or as part of the challenge is the SAI saying in their report, look, it took us forever because we had to get information from the line ministries, for example?
Well, yeah, you can't blame the SAI completely for all the shortfalls, right? Like I mentioned earlier, there is a problem with the legal framework. So if you have a legal framework that does not spell out clearly to the Accountant General of the Federation on how much time he has to consolidate the financial statement and submit it to the Auditor-General for review, you're going to have this kind of problem. So currently the Constitution provides a timeline for the Auditor-General to submit its report to Parliament, and the Constitution provides for a 90-day window to submit that report. But the same Constitution does not mention what timeline the Accountant General has after the end of the financial year to consolidate the financial statement for all agencies of government and submit it to the Auditor General. So you have a situation where the Accountant General can take forever in consolidating the financial statement. But as soon as he decides to submit the financial statement to the Auditor-General, and he does so, the Auditor-General then has 90 days to deliver that his audit report to Parliament. So there's a huge gap in that regard. And our advocacy had been targeted in ensuring that we'll have a modern audit law that addresses that kind of gap. You can have that kind of gap go on, and then you expect efficiency in the system. So what we've proposed, and the bill that is currently before the National Assembly in Nigeria, which has been passed, incidentally, unfortunately, passed by the House of Reps, but still awaiting concurrence by the Senate. One of the clauses in that bill provides that the Accountant General shall now have 90 days as well in preparing his financial statements. And once he submits it to the Auditor-General, the Auditor-General will also have 90 days in auditing the financial statement and submitting its audit report to Parliament. And the Parliament, which is a big deal here now, will now have 120 days, I think, if I'm not mistaken, in concluding the review of the Auditor-General's reports. If we're able to get the bill concurred to by the Senate and signed by the President, it's going to be a game changer for public auditing in Nigeria and accountability, really.
Well, that's very encouraging to hear that. I think you're right that I like to emphasize the need to have a strong alignment between Constitution, primary legislation, secondary legislation such as Treasury instructions, etc., that help to better define the process. Sometimes, the question could be if Nigeria's first republic was, you mentioned 1999 earlier in our pre-call, right? So it's been 26 years. I've had former ministers in other countries, in other West African countries, tell me there's a reason why we have not well-defined legislation, not well-defined processes. It makes corruption easier. It makes it easier for the government to avoid scrutiny. Is that why it's taken so long to get this legislation through the National Assembly, or to get the executive branch to draft this legislation?
Yeah, I think so. I think, when you have a culture that has gone on for quite some time and people have benefited from that culture, you want those who have benefited from the culture to then change the culture. I think it's going to really, really be problematic. In that case, you would need someone who understands the issues first and foremost. Second of all, who has the public interest at heart. And third of all, who has the political will to get things done. So I think we've not had a combination of all these three that I mentioned in any government since the Fourth Republic. Maybe now, I don't know, but even now you still have some misses here and there. So what I'm saying is you would need someone who understands the issues. Why a public finance management system that is efficient and effective links to policy priorities of your administration and helps you to deliver those priorities. And if those priorities actually advances public interest, and you as the head of the government, able to exercise strong political will and saying that no matter what comes in the way of all of these, I'll get this done. Then we'll be able to move things. With respect to the legal framework for public auditing in Nigeria, what we've had since 1999 is that we've had presidents who've had the opportunity. In fact, I think in during the tenure of former President Obasanjo, who of course ruled the country between 1999 and 2007, the audit law was sent to him. He refused assent to the law. During former President Jonathan, who was elected in 2011 and ran the government to 2015, the audit law was equally sent to him for assent. He refused assent. Also, during the former president, the late former president, now President Muhammadu Buhari, who led the government from 2015 to 2023, the audit law, the audit bill was equally sent to him. He refused assent as well. So, so that again tells you, I mean, it points you in the direction. Why are successive presidents refusing to assent to a bill that empowers the country's supreme audit institution to be able to do its work more effectively? Like you mentioned, we're not just going to rely on the constitutional provisions, right? We want the constitutional provisions are there because they provide the foundational structures for things that need to be done, but you also need legislative instruments that provides details to how those constitutional provisions should be applied, and that is what is missing currently. And without having those legislative, acts of the parliament that provides those details, we're going to continue to have these gaps. Unfortunately, it's us, the people, that pays ultimately for those gaps that exist.
And you mentioned that the bill was awaiting concurrence in the Senate. I like to call that, we have a Senate as well in Canada, right? I like to call that languishing rather than awaiting concurrence, right?
Absolutely.
But I can understand the challenge. Let's talk about what your organization can do or is doing, and what civil society is doing in Nigeria to make sure that there's not another repetition of a law that's passed, in this case only by the National Assembly, but a law that's passed, an audit law that's passed, that will increase transparency and accountability, but doesn't get through the government system. What is civil society able to do about that?
What we've done and we're doing is engaging the different stakeholders, right? And just recently, I mean, we've had to engage multilateral institutions. I mean, we've had some interactions with the World Bank. A few weeks ago, I had the discussion with the team at the World Bank to sort of assess the situation and what the convening strength of those kinds of institutions can do in helping solve the problem. We've also had conversation with the IMF and how IMF can sort of use its strength to advocate. A few weeks ago, also, I discussed with a team from the U.S. Embassy who wanted to understand the issues and what can be done. And after our meeting at the embassy, I know that the team from the embassy also had to visit, legislators to then further, discuss some of the matters that we discussed privately. But after that, I've had interactions with the chair of Public Accounts Committee, whether at the Senate or the House of Reps. And the last meeting I had with the chairman of Public Accounts Committee at the House of Reps gave indication that the Senate will do something very, very, very soon. How soon? I don't know. Politicians, their timeline seems to be a bit different from the timeline for ordinary citizens. So those are things. We're engaging the different stakeholders, whether within the executive, the legislature, and the diplomatic community, the development ecosystem, and using all avenues to see how we can get this over the line. But it is not only about getting the law, the bill over the line, assented to, and becoming law. I think also we need to start looking forward. If we have the law assented to, then what happens in terms of implementing the different provisions of the law? Does the
Absolutely.
current SAI, as it is structured, does it have the capacity to implement the law? And I'll give you an example. One of the issues that we're also dealing with constitutionally is the powers of the Auditor-General to audit statutory bodies, including SOEs. And there is the contention.
I was just going to raise that, by the way. Go ahead, please. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was just going to raise that.
Yeah, there is a contention currently within the National Assembly on whether that power should be granted. And currently, as we speak, there is a constitutional amendment process going on. We've submitted memoranda, the SAI has submitted memoranda to the Constitutional Amendment Committee. If we're able to get the federal legislators agree to that amendment, and we're also able to get 2/3 of the state parliaments to also agree to it, it means that we will have a change in how things are done with the SOEs and the kind of accountability mechanisms.
Oh, yeah, that's tough.
And what that then means is that for the SAIs, the federal SAI, for instance, does it have the capacity in terms of the human resource strength to deliver on that mandate? Does it have the resources in terms of funding to deliver on that mandate? I don't think so as we speak. When you look at the human resource capacity, it's not where it should be in terms of delivery on all of these obligations. And when you look at the funding allocation to the SAI, you have an SAI that is largely underfunded. And what do I mean? The anti-corruption agencies in Nigeria get almost 12, 13, 14 times budget of the SAI. So you have a country that prioritizes more anti-corruption than preventing corruption. That's what it means. You want to fight corruption, but I mean, why would you not rather put systems in place that prevents corruption from happening in the first place than spending billions of dollars, trying to identify corruption and nipping them in the bud? So those are real issues.
And I want to ask you a couple of things about that. First of all, you mentioned the constitutional amendment. Here in Canada, we have lost, because our amending formula is so rigid, our constitutional amending formula is so rigid, I would say we have lost key opportunities to renew our democracy because of the fact because if someone mentions amending the Constitution in Canada, politicians run in the other direction. It is a bottomless pit. I'm not going to comment on your prospects for amending your constitution, but what I do want to ask you is it absolutely necessary to have an amendment in order to allow the Auditor-General to audit statutory bodies, or could that be created in legislation?
Yeah, it can be stated in the law, right? Currently, the problem is that the Constitution is very clear that the Auditor-General does not have the power to audit statutory bodies.
I see.
So we need that to change. What the Constitution then provides for, even though it doesn't grant the power to the Auditor-General to audit statutory bodies, what the Constitution provides for is that the Auditor-General has the power to appoint external auditors that will then audit these agencies. There's a big problem there because it is these agencies that pay the external auditors for their services. So, and that creates a huge gap there in terms of the reporting mechanism, what the external auditor reports, and it's what the external auditor reports that he then submits to the Auditor General's office, right? So that's a big problem. The Constitution also provides for, in terms of what the Auditor General has power to do with statutory bodies, is periodic checks. And what we've the kind of discussion we've had with the Auditor General is, the law, the Constitution doesn't give you power to conduct routine statutory audit, but you can do periodic checks. And who says periodic checks cannot be done anytime, any time of the year? And how many times there's no limitation to how many times you can conduct periodic checks in the year. The question is, do you have the wherewithal in terms of the human resources to conduct those periodic checks? Because sometimes those periodic checks will require you to have people who have tailored expertise to be able to successfully conduct those periodic checks. For instance, if you are auditing, statutory corporations in the communications sector, for instance, you would need auditors who have understanding and expertise in that subject matter. When we used to have the Nigeria National Petroleum Corporation, you had situation where auditors will go and audit, the petroleum corporation, and they don't have the necessary expertise to be able to deliver quality audits. So those are real issues. So yes, on the one hand, we need constitutional amendments that opens up the door completely for the Auditor-General to go in. But currently, there's a part of the window that is opened, but the Auditor-General isn't even utilizing fully that open window.
Sorry, that's really interesting. And just before we move on, I'll just say that what really concerns me about what you're saying is that there seems to be a large hole or gap, which is the SOE sector. It's almost a giant blind spot, right? So, when we look at the debt to GDP ratio in Nigeria currently at 58%, first of all, obviously you and I know full well that debt to GDP ratio is not a good indicator of debt sustainability, but not everybody is aware of that. But even when we start with the debt to GDP ratio of 58.9%, that doesn't include the SOE sector, as far as I could tell. As far as you and I looked at the I looked at the debt transparency heat map from the World Bank, and so when I was in Bangladesh recently doing a workshop for the Ministry of Finance and Central Bank on public debt management, we talked about the fact that their debt to GDP ratio is below 40%, but doesn't include the SOE sector. So there's a giant hole there. There's a giant blind spot, and somebody in the group mentioned, from the debt management team, mentioned that the SOE debt is much higher than the central government debt. So that's quite concerning. So here we go. We don't know what the SOE figures are, SOE debt figures are, unless the audit office has provided some kind of estimate. Yeah. And the Auditor-General is not auditing the SOE sector. So that's what I think would be termed as a ticking time bomb, right? A bomb waiting to go off, in a sense, right? Yeah. Because we see the debt distress that other countries have experienced, partly as a result of their SOE sector being so inefficient. What are your thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. And I would say, I would want to see a situation where everybody's in the basket. Everybody is in the basket, whether SOEs or non-SOEs. You were able to, peep into what everybody is doing, what they acquire in terms of public debt, and how that impacts on the sustainability of the domestic economy. So I think that first and foremost, if we're able to lift that burden of not having the Auditor-General to be able to audit SOEs, that will sort of improve the transparency of how they're utilizing resources, whether they're acquiring debts, what kind of debts they're acquiring, and how they're using those debts and all of that. How we can quickly get to that point, like I said, whether the constitutional amendment process that is currently ongoing can help, provide some sort of solution, a deal breaker of some sort in that regard, is what we're waiting to see. I'm not, overly optimistic as to what the constitutional amendment process will deliver on. But like I said, there's also a window that can be explored, which I don't think the Auditor-General's office is exploring fully as we speak. And like you said, it's a ticking time bomb that we need to pay attention to. But also in the quest for transparency, I think that the debt management office has the obligation to then also But because if these debts have significant risk for the economy, then we will need to, like I said, put everything in the basket and know exactly where we stand in terms of public debt, actually, and whether we've overshot ourselves and what we need to do in the limiting the risk on the domestic economy.
And it seems to me the choice is quite evident, which is wait for a debt crisis, which unfortunately, I mean, and I say that only in the sense, not in the Nigerian context, but we look at what's happening in Kenya, we look at what's happening in Sri Lanka. Unfortunately, a lot of these reforms only happen after the international community steps in. That's why I wasn't surprised that you mentioned, talking to the IMF and the World Bank. So the hope would be that countries would be able to adapt these types of changes voluntarily before it's too late, rather than waiting for collapse,
absolutely,
societal unrest, etc., etc.
Absolutely.
I just want to ask you one other question before we wrap up, which is related to the Public Accounts Committee. I mean, you mentioned, of course, when it comes to public debt, you have, we've talked about some challenges with the Auditor-General's reports. You did publish a post very recently commending the House of Representatives Public Accounts Committee for completing the audit cycle, which means that they reviewed the report and the report was adopted by plenary. But that's kind of where the good news stops, in a sense. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and explain why that's problematic?
Well, yeah, I think that, so for instance, since the Fourth Republic in Nigeria, we haven't had a situation where the Public Account Committee, whether at the House of Reps or in the Senate, concludes any part of the audit report. And usually we would have the Public Account Committee, either of the chamber, looking at maybe 1 year of a report here, another year of the report there, and and all of that. So they sort of split the work between the two committees. The process we've had to concluding the audit cycle in Nigeria was in 2018, when the then Public Account Committee chair, Honorable Chinder, rallied the committee to see, okay, how much work can we quickly get done in reviewing the report of the Auditor-General. I think at the time they were reviewing the 2016 report of the Auditor-General. So we had this engagement, and we were, asking questions about, completing the process. But that never saw the light of day in terms of completing the process. And I know that these things sometimes become tools of negotiation for legislators, for politicians, especially the report of the Auditor-General. In a system where you have, high level of, corruption tendencies, you often see situations where, the legislators now use the report of the General as tools to negotiate, some sort of, benefits. You might call it from agencies of government, or those that have been queried or reported to not have accounted for one thing or the other. But what happened now, and the significance of what happened now, is that for the first time in 26 years, you now have a Public Account Committee that was able to conclude the process. I'm sure it wasn't easy for that committee as well to conclude that process. Because I can imagine what goes on behind the scene in trying to get this process concluded. But ultimately is that the committee reviewed the report of the Auditor-General and then, provided its own recommendations, what you can call secondary recommendations. The recommendations of the Auditor-General is the primary recommendations. So when you then have those secondary recommendations, and then because of the way it's structured in Nigeria, you then have the committee will have to take those recommendations back to plenary and review it clause by clause, and have the plenary to then sustain or reject any of those secondary recommendations. In this case, you have a plenary that then sustained all of those recommendations, and that then gave an indication after that work was concluded that about 30 agencies of government needed to return back to Treasury more than $100 billion and close to $1 million. That's very significant in itself. And for us at PLSI, having worked in that space for close to 10 years, we know how difficult it is. Seeing this for the very first time in our work history, we celebrate it. But we are not celebrating in terms of this is victory. We're celebrating in terms of progress, right? Yeah, this is progress. What we are asking, which we believe will be the ultimate victory, is if we're able to sustain these actions consistently, repeat the process, and ensure that those recommendations that have now been sustained by the plenary are implemented by relevant agencies of government, including anti-corruption agencies. And that would mean that monies are recovered from those that have been found culpable, and those that need to be prosecuted are then taken to courts.
So I wish we could continue this conversation longer, but I think we should wrap it up. We should stop here for now. Hopefully it won't be, I know it won't be the last time we speak. Olusegun Elemo, the Executive Director of the Paradigm Leadership Support Initiative, thank you so much for your time and your insight on this important topic.
Thank you very much, Geoff. Thank you for the platform. Thank you, and thank you to our audience.
Humancoined is an integral part of Nexus PFM Consulting. If you enjoyed this episode, you can also find us on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. If you have any questions about the work we do, you can contact us at info@nexuspfm.com.